Hello, welcome to Constituent Marking with Fred Long on Proof Text. I'm Fred Long. We're looking at 1 Thessalonians 2:4. There will be some bird sounds, I forewarn you, but we'll just jump right in and see what we can do. So, Allah is a correction, marks plus correction. So typically there is a negative in the previous context, which is there was a lot of negatives. Paul said our exhortation was not in these bad kinds of things, deception, beguiling, or uncleanness. But, he says, so this is the correction, but, and then we have a kathos. So kathos is a conjunction. We put a box around it, green, and it starts a subordinate clause. And this subordinate clause, how far does it extend? The kathos, dedokomadsaste, upo tu theou pistev thene to evangelion. That's where it ends, after to evangelion. Okay, so just as we have been approved, that's have been approved, dedokmas, this mitha is first plural, that's a perfect middle passive indicative from dokimadzo. This is a rich word that has to do with testing and approving, like evaluating, particularly in official capacities. So Paul uses this word a lot in 2 Corinthians. In fact, there was an ancient kind of speech form that was called a dokimazia trial. You can hear the relationship of the dokimazia is related to dokimadzo. And a dokimazia trial was a kind of scrutiny trial for the worthiness of some Athenian official to occupy that position. And actually 2 Corinthians matches that kind of defense speech really, really, really well. But obviously he's using the verb well before 2 Corinthians, but informed 2 Corinthians is in fact a defense speech. That's my dissertation, Ancient Rhetoric and Paul's Apology, the compositional unity of 2 Corinthians. So this is a very interesting and significant verb, perfect tense, indicating that there's been a resultant approval. So Paul is basically affirming here, he's affirming that he has God's approval. So upo tu theou, having been approved by God. Now approved what? Here we have a infinitive, pistev thene, the gospel. I'm going to go ahead and put this into a second subordinate clause. So I'm going to start to number these because you have the kathos clause, which is the number 1, but then you also have I'm going to put it in pink, the infinitive clause. We were proved by God in order to be entrusted. There is a slight sense of intentionality here, purpose. We were proved to be entrusted. Now, pistev thene is aorist passive infinitive form. The thene is the giveaway there, to be entrusted. And then you have the direct object, to evangelion, double underline, the direct object of this aorist passive verb. Now, we've encountered this before, but if you're new and maybe haven't heard my explanation of this, we're looking, like you might be wondering, well, how can a passive verb have a direct object? Well, the answer to that is that because this verb, when it's in the active voice, can take two objects. I can entrust to someone something. That someone and something indicate that there are two complements for this verb, to entrust, to trust someone with something. And when you go to the passive voice, one of those objects can be retained. And that's what's going on here. So the to evangelion is a retained object working with the passive voice of pistevo. Yeah, and this is a purpose construction. It's not a heavily marked one, but it is. I think it is one. Paul was entrusted it in order to be. No, he was approved in order to be entrusted with the gospel. So this is all a subordinate clause. Remember, this is the correction. But just as we were approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, thus he says, "Utos," dotted underline. Thus, lalumen, we are speaking. Thus we are speaking. So the kathos clause, the kathos is indicating a basis, a correspondence, which involves some sense of cause or basis. So it indicates, it's from kata. So kata indicates a standard. And so here we have a conjunction that's built off of that with os that indicates a standard or basis for Paul's conduct here. So utos really is I'm going to put it in green because this is I would call this a correlative emphasis, where you have two conjunctions or a conjunction adverb pairing that adds more force to what is said. So the utos is marking manner, the manner of Paul's speaking. So the manner of his speaking is corresponding to the scrutiny, the dokimazo, that God has ascribed to Paul in order to entrust him with the gospel. It's out of that approval process by God, upo tu theou. I mean, that's an agency there. It's out of that context, in the manner of that we are speaking, Paul says. And now what happens next is that Paul is going to qualify that with a uk os and an uk os clause working with a participle. Now the participle is indicating a explanatory. It's a circumstantial participle. Areskontes. It is a circumstantial. In this case, participle. In this case, it's post-positioned. It's post-positioned, and the uk os at the beginning is indicating manner, not as though. So it's really marking concession. So although. So it's marking with the uk. It's indicating a manner, and this is an important point here to recognize, is that the circumstantial participles, oftentimes they're called adverbial, but that's a misnomer in the sense that they do not inherently convey adverbial meanings. But that's how we're taught Greek. We're taught, students are taught to call these adverbial when in fact they're not. They're circumstantial. And in this case, its postposition is indicating some kind of further explanation. And there we have to look to the semantic marking of uk os, which is indicating like a concession, not as in the manner of pleasing anthropos. And I'm going to double underline anthropos because that is the direct object of our aresko. Aresko takes the dative case for its object complement. And so areskontes is a masculine plural nominative because it is going with lalumen. It's providing more about what the manner of Paul's speaking, that it's not in the manner of pleasing people, anthropis, but here's the correction. So it's not one thing, but who is he pleasing? But God. And so God is the direct object of the implied areskontes. So here we have another clause which is implying the previous participle, but we are pleasing God. And then we have a to dikomads on ti, tas cardias amon. Tas cardias is double underline as the direct object of dokimads on ti, which is dative singular masculine, present active participle, which is in relation to theo. And then you have the amon, which is a genitive modifying our hearts. So what's going on here? Now I put an equal sign here with the to dokimadzonte t because, and I'll put a question mark there, and that's fine with this method. You can put question marks. So God is the one, obviously, that Paul says, that's the correction, the Allah there. The correction is that he's pleasing God. God, the one approving our hearts. And I'm taking the to dokimadzonti as a substantive participle, and that's why I put an equal sign there. Now, it's possible that we could understand that as a attributive participle, which is modifying theo. And then the question is why is theo, why does it not have the article? There's no article in the front of theo. Well, theo probably is being, I would not say probably, it is being stressed by the lack of article. That's one of the article usage rules. God is clearly on stage. We have a upo tu theou earlier, tu theou, God is known, well known. And so when you take away the article after someone or some entity is known in the discourse, when then you mention it again without the article, there is stress on it, a prominence to it. And indeed, this is what Paul is correcting. This is what he's trying to clarify. I am pleasing God. And then you have this, the one who tests and approves our hearts. Now, if I take that as a attributive participle, I might translate it, God who approves my heart. But I don't like doing that. And the reason why I don't is because there actually is another construction. If Paul wanted to say who in another way, he would have used os. And he doesn't do that here. He doesn't do that. He keeps it as a participle. So in my estimation, I think this attribute that either attribute or quality that God has as approving one, that's better served in my translation by just taking it as a substantive participle as the one approving. That's just my kind of preference in terms of how to take that. But, we could arm wrestle over it. Sure, attributive participle with an anarthrous noun that's being emphasized, or God as the approving one that approves, tests and approves Paul's heart. Paul and company's hearts, their hearts in the plural. Remember that Paul is writing this with many, many people, 3 people, Timothy and Silvanus. All right, well, that's my marking of this verse and translation and discussion. I hope you found that helpful. And go ahead and subscribe and share the good work that I'm doing here. Hopefully it's good work. And look forward to having you watch and listen next time. Take care.